March 17th, 1943. A single coded message reaches a German intelligence post in the heart of occupied Paris. Just 14 words, no names attached, no coordinates given, no signatures, nothing that would betray its origin to casual eyes. But to the man who read it, Major Hermann Giskes of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, those 14 words hit harder than any Allied bomb dropped on Berlin. They meant the unthinkable. They meant exposure. They meant that British intelligence had just caught the Germans in their own game, and they knew it. For 2 years, German spies had been playing the most dangerous game of deception in modern warfare. Through a secret operation codenamed Englandspiel, the England game, they had manipulated dozens of Allied agents, intercepted countless messages, and fed false intelligence back to London while capturing every single operative the British sent into Holland. It was a masterpiece of counter-espionage, a perfect trap, an illusion so complete that the British kept sending men into the waiting arms of the Gestapo, never suspecting that every radio transmission they received was written by German hands. But on that March day, with a single intercept, the illusion didn't just crack, it shattered, and every agent, every code, every small victory the Nazis thought they owned, turned out to be built on sand. What happened next would reshape the future of espionage forever, influence the outcome of D-Day, and mark the psychological turning point when German intelligence officers knew, deep in their bones, that this war was already lost. This is the story of the greatest counterintelligence operation of World War II, and the moment it all came crashing down. May 1940. The Netherlands falls to Nazi Germany in just 5 days. Queen Wilhelmina flees to London. The Dutch government in exile desperately tries to maintain contact with resistance networks back home. And in the corridors of British intelligence, a new organization is born from the chaos of defeat, the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Churchill's orders were simple and brutal: set Europe ablaze. The SOE's mission was to organize resistance, conduct sabotage operations, and coordinate intelligence networks across occupied territories. They would train agents, provide them with weapons and radio equipment, and parachute them into enemy territory under cover of darkness. These were not soldiers in any traditional sense. They were teachers, engineers, clerks, translators. Ordinary people turned into extraordinary operatives by necessity and courage. And the Netherlands was a priority target. But the Germans had their own plans. Enter Major Hermann Giskes, a calculating, methodical officer of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service. While the Gestapo preferred brutality and terror, Giskes understood something more subtle: the power of deception. He didn't just want to catch British spies, he wanted to use them. The first SOE agents parachuted into Holland in the autumn of 1941. They carried false papers, gold coins sewn into jacket linings, and radio sets disguised in suitcases. Their mission was to establish communication with London, coordinate drops of weapons and supplies, and build a resistance network that could strike at German infrastructure. Within weeks, they were caught. But here's where the story takes its turn. The radios kept transmitting. From German-occupied cells, captured agents were forced to continue their communications with London. But now, every word was dictated by Giskes and his team. The British had no idea. Week after week, they received status reports, requests for supplies, updates on resistance activities. All of it fiction. The agents had been trained to include security checks in their transmissions, subtle mistakes or coded phrases that would signal to London if they had been compromised. Miss the security check, and London would know this agent has been captured. But fear does strange things to the mind. Some agents, under interrogation, revealed their security checks. Others, hoping to protect their networks, deliberately left them out, expecting London to realize something was wrong and stop sending more men into the trap. London didn't notice, or if they did, they ignored it. Agent after agent parachuted into Holland. Each time, Giskes was waiting. His network of informants, combined with intercepted radio traffic and broken codes, meant the Germans knew the drop zones sometimes before the agents themselves did. By early 1943, over 50 SOE agents had been captured. Not one mission had succeeded, and yet London kept sending more. Giskes called it Englandspiel, the England game, and he played it with the precision of a chess master. He fed London just enough real intelligence to seem credible, mixed with false information designed to waste Allied resources and protect German operations. He requested weapons drops, which the Luftwaffe promptly confiscated. He reported sabotage missions that never happened. He even invented entire resistance cells, complete with code names and backstories, building a phantom army that existed only on paper and in radio transmissions. In the files of the Abwehr, Giskes kept meticulous records, photographs of every captured agent, transcripts of every radio message, maps showing the locations of weapons caches that would never reach resistance hands. He was building something unprecedented in the history of espionage, a complete simulation of an entire intelligence network. And the British believed every word. London believed they were talking to heroes of the Dutch resistance, men and women risking everything to fight back against occupation. In reality, they were talking to ghosts, ghosts controlled by the very enemy they thought they were fighting. To understand how Englandspiel worked, you have to understand the psychology of it. This wasn't just about breaking codes or intercepting messages. This was about understanding human nature, trust, hope, desperation, and the willingness to believe what you want to believe. The agents sent into Holland were brave, yes, but they were also, in many cases, barely trained. The SOE was a new organization, scrambling to recruit and deploy operatives fast enough to meet Churchill's demands. Training courses that should have taken months were compressed into weeks. These men and women learned to shoot, to use explosives, to send coded radio messages. But they weren't trained to withstand the kind of psychological pressure the Gestapo and Abwehr could bring to bear. Giskes rarely used torture, at least not the crude methods favored by the Gestapo. He understood that broken bodies produce unreliable information. Instead, he used something more insidious. He offered hope. He would sit across from captured agents and explain their situation with almost gentle honesty. Your mission is over. Your radio codes have been compromised. Your network is rolled up. You can't win, but you can save lives. Continue your transmissions. Help us make them believable. And when the war ends, and it will end, you'll be treated as prisoners of war, not spies. You'll survive this. Some agents refused. They were handed over to the Gestapo, where mercy was not on offer. Others cooperated, not because they were cowards, but because they saw no alternative. They were trapped in enemy territory, cut off from help, facing execution, and Giskes made them believe that cooperation was the only way to stay alive. He was offering them the one thing no prisoner can resist: hope. And so the messages kept flowing back to London, arrived safely, establishing contacts, require weapons drop at following coordinates, resistance growing, morale high, send more agents, we need reinforcements. Each message was carefully crafted by German intelligence officers who had studied captured SOE training materials, memorized British procedures, and learned to mimic the fist, the unique tapping rhythm each radio operator develops, as distinctive as a fingerprint. In London, the SOE believed their Dutch networks were thriving. Reports came back of successful sabotage operations, growing resistance cells, weapons caches hidden across the countryside. Every new agent sent seemed to integrate smoothly, sending back regular status updates. The illusion was perfect, but not everyone was convinced. At Bletchley Park, the legendary centre of British code breaking, a different story was emerging. Cryptographers analysing Dutch SOE traffic began noticing patterns, small inconsistencies, missing security checks, messages that seemed too smooth, too regular, lacking the urgency and mistakes that real agents under pressure would make. One analyst wrote in a memo, "These transmissions have the quality of school exercises, not field operations." But here's where the tragedy deepens. The warnings were ignored. Why? Partly bureaucratic inertia. The SOE was a new organization, still finding its footing, and internal communication was chaotic. Partly wishful thinking. Commanders wanted to believe their operations were succeeding. And partly pride. No one wanted to admit that they'd been deceived, that dozens of agents might have been sent to their deaths, that the entire Dutch operation might be controlled by the enemy. So the warnings were filed away, the operations continued, and Giskes played on. By the winter of 1942, the Englandspiel operation had intercepted over 200 tons of weapons and supplies dropped by the RAF. Automatic weapons, explosives, ammunition, radio equipment, all of it falling directly into German hands. The cost in human lives was mounting too. Every agent captured meant more intelligence for the Germans, more codebooks seized, more contacts betrayed. The network effect was devastating. Each captured agent led to more captures, in an ever-widening spiral. And still, London sent more. Here's what makes this story so painful. The agents knew they were going to die. Not all of them, not at first. But as the months wore on, as more and more operatives disappeared or were captured, the survivors in holding cells began to understand. This was a one-way mission. Some left messages scratched into cell walls. Others managed to hide notes in the lining of clothes, hoping someday someone would find them and know the truth. One agent, Hugh Blowers, later recalled, "We tried everything to signal London. We made mistakes in our transmissions. We changed our sending style. We hoped, prayed that someone would notice. But the drops kept coming. The missions kept arriving. And we knew they weren't listening." Each time the British sent new men into Holland, Giskes was waiting. And each time, those men joined the growing number of prisoners who understood they were pieces in a game they couldn't escape. But in every masterpiece of deception lies the seed of its own destruction. The question was, who would find it first? March 17th, 1943. the day everything changed. The message came through an unexpected channel, not from an SOE transmission, but from an intercepted German communication picked up by Allied signals intelligence monitoring Nazi military traffic. 14 words. A routine internal Abwehr message being transmitted between occupied France and Berlin. And buried in those 14 words was a reference that made no sense unless you knew about Englandspiel. The analyst who caught it almost missed the significance. It was a passing reference, a casual mention in what appeared to be a routine status update about intelligence operations in the Netherlands. But the code name was wrong. It referenced an operation that, according to SOE records, didn't exist. Or rather, it existed in the mind of the Germans as part of the fictional resistance network they'd been building. And that's when the entire house of cards started to collapse. Within hours, the message was escalated up the chain of command. Intelligence officers pulled files, compared transmissions, cross-referenced code names and operation details. And slowly, horrifyingly, the pattern emerged. The missing security checks weren't mistakes. They were warnings. The too smooth transmissions weren't signs of success. They were signs of control. An emergency meeting was called at SOE headquarters. The atmosphere was described by one attendee as funeral. For the first time, the full scope of the disaster was laid out. Over 50 agents captured. Hundreds of tons of weapons lost. An unknown number of Dutch resistance members betrayed. And 2 years of operations in the Netherlands, all of it compromised from the beginning. The immediate question was, what do we do now? Do we stop all communications? That would alert the Germans that we know, but it would also stop the bleeding. No more agents sent into the trap. Or do we keep playing the game, feed false information back, try to turn the tables, use the compromised network to deceive the deceivers? The decision was made quickly. Continue the transmissions, but change what we send. If the Germans thought they were controlling British intelligence, let them keep thinking that. But now, every message would be designed to mislead, to waste German resources, to feed them false intelligence about Allied plans. The student was about to become the master. Meanwhile, in Paris, Major Giskes had no idea his perfect game was unraveling. The Englandspiel operation continued as normal. New messages came in from London. New drop zones were confirmed. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as planned. But then, something changed. The requests from London became stranger. Drop coordinates in areas that made no strategic sense. Missions that seemed designed to accomplish nothing. Intelligence questions that felt off somehow. Experienced officers began to feel it, that subtle shift in tone when your opponent suddenly knows more than they should. Giskes was too good at deception not to recognize when it was being used against him. He started cross-referencing transmissions, looking for patterns. He interrogated the captured agents more carefully, searching for any sign they'd gotten word to London. He even began to suspect his own team, wondering if there was a mole in the Abwehr. But the truth was simpler and more devastating. The British had figured it out, not through any dramatic escape or secret message, but through their own intelligence work. The same kind of signals analysis and pattern recognition that Giskes had used against them. We don't know the exact moment when Giskes received confirmation. It might have been a memo from Berlin, a conversation with a superior officer, or perhaps it was something he simply realized, late one night, sitting alone in his office as the weight of evidence became undeniable. The game was over, not lost exactly. The damage to British operations had been real and devastating, but no longer his to control. In that silence, Giskes understood. The game was no longer his to play. Years later, after the war, Giskes would write about this moment with a strange mixture of pride and regret. He'd created the most successful counterintelligence operation in modern history. He'd captured dozens of enemy agents, seized vast quantities of weapons, and fed false intelligence to London for 2 years. But in the end, he'd taught the British a lesson they would never forget, a lesson they would use against Germany with devastating effect. The exposure of Englandspiel marked a turning point in the secret war, not just for the SOE, which would completely reorganize its operations and security procedures, but for the entire Allied approach to intelligence and deception. They had learned from their mistakes, and they had learned from Giskes. By late 1943, British intelligence had become obsessed with security. Every transmission was checked and double-checked. New protocols for security codes were implemented. Training for agents was extended and intensified. But more importantly, they embraced deception. If the Germans could create an entire phantom resistance network, then so could the British. If false radio traffic could mislead an enemy, then why not use it on a massive scale? Enter Operation Fortitude. It was 1944, and the Allied invasion of Europe was being planned. The landing would happen at Normandy, but the Germans couldn't know that. So British intelligence created an entire phantom army. The 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, commanded by General Patton, supposedly preparing to invade at Calais. There were inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic, double agents feeding false intelligence, elaborate fake headquarters with actors playing the roles of officers. It was Englandspiel in reverse, and it was built on lessons learned from Giskes' operation. The deception worked. Even after the Normandy landings began on June 6, 1944, German High Command kept substantial forces at Calais, convinced the real invasion was still coming there. Hitler himself believed it. The phantom army that existed only in radio transmissions and carefully placed intelligence reports tied down German divisions that could have reinforced Normandy and potentially thrown the Allies back into the sea. Historians estimate that Operation Fortitude may have saved tens of thousands of Allied lives by diluting German defensive strength, and it all traced back to the lessons of Englandspiel. By 1944, German intelligence credibility had collapsed. The Abwehr was in chaos. Hitler, paranoid and increasingly erratic, dissolved the organization entirely in early 1944, folding it into the SS Security Service. Officers like Giskes found themselves sidelined, their expertise suddenly suspect. The Führer no longer trusted his own spies. And who could blame him? The one operation they'd thought was an unqualified success, Englandspiel, had been turned against them. But the human cost was still being tallied. Of the more than 50 SOE agents captured during Englandspiel, very few survived the war. Most were eventually executed, sent to concentration camps, or died in captivity. Huub Lauwers, one of the first captured agents who had tried desperately to signal London with his missing security checks, somehow survived. He was liberated from a camp in 1945, weighing barely 90 pounds. He would spend the rest of his life advocating for the recognition of those who died, arguing that they weren't failures, but victims of a system that ignored their warnings. In 1946, Lauwers testified before a British inquiry into the Englandspiel disaster. His words were measured but devastating. "We did everything we could to warn you. We changed our codes. We made mistakes deliberately. We hoped you would notice, but you didn't. And then you sent more men, and we watched them arrive, one by one, into German hands. That is something I will carry with me forever." The inquiry's final report was scathing. It cited failures of communication, overconfidence, and bureaucratic dysfunction. But it also acknowledged something darker: wishful thinking. The commanders had wanted so badly to believe their operations were succeeding that they had ignored evidence to the contrary. "Victory has many fathers," the saying goes, but failure is an orphan. In the Netherlands today, there are memorials to the agents who died, quiet places where the names are carved in stone. The Dutch remember them not as spies or soldiers, but as what they truly were: ordinary people who volunteered for impossible missions because they believed in something bigger than themselves. Many of them suspected, or even knew, that they were walking into a trap, but they went anyway, because someone had to try. And what of Hermann Giskes? After the war, he was tried as a war criminal, not for Englandspiel itself, which was considered a legitimate intelligence operation, but for his role in the execution of captured agents. He was acquitted, the tribunal finding that he had argued against the executions and had tried to keep the captured agents alive as prisoners of war. He returned to civilian life in West Germany and eventually wrote a memoir defending his actions during Englandspiel. In his writing, there's a fascinating duality: pride in his operational success mixed with a strange kind of melancholy. He wrote, "We won every battle in the intelligence war. We captured every agent. We intercepted every weapon. And yet, we lost. We were never defeated by weapons, but by the mind. In the end, that was the real battlefield, and the British had mastered it." It's the closest he ever came to admitting what that March day in 1943 had revealed: that winning battles doesn't mean winning wars, that perfect operations can still serve a losing cause, and that the side which learns fastest, even from its own mistakes, is the side that ultimately prevails. So what does Englandspiel teach us? On the surface, it's a story about spies and codes, radio transmissions, and phantom networks. But look deeper, and it's about something more fundamental. It's about the danger of believing your own propaganda, the trap of overconfidence, the way institutions can become so invested in a narrative that they ignore evidence that contradicts it. The British wanted to believe their Dutch operations were succeeding, so they ignored the warning signs. The Germans believed their deception was perfect, so they missed the moment when the tables turned. Both sides fell into the same trap. They saw what they wanted to see. But there's something else too, a truth about the nature of deception itself. Every successful lie contains the seeds of its own exposure, because maintaining a deception requires control, perfect, complete control over every detail. And the more complex the lie, the more points of failure exist. Giskes' operation was masterful in its execution, but it required that everything go right, all the time, forever. One intercepted message, one analyst who noticed a pattern, one small crack in the facade. That's all it took. Today, you can visit Bletchley Park and see the machines that broke the German codes. You can read about Enigma and Ultra, the code-breaking triumphs that gave the Allies a crucial advantage. But Englandspiel isn't as celebrated, maybe because it's uncomfortable. It reminds us that intelligence work isn't always about brilliant successes. Sometimes it's about learning from catastrophic failures, about adapting faster than your enemy, about taking the lessons taught by defeat and turning them into weapons. The agents who died in Englandspiel didn't get to see D-Day. They didn't know that their sacrifice and the exposure of the operation would lead to the deception plans that helped win the war. But their warnings, ignored at the time, were finally heard, and in being heard, they changed everything. Wars are fought with steel, but they're won with silence, with the patient work of code breakers and analysts, with the courage of agents who walk into darkness, knowing they might not return, and sometimes with the hard lessons learned when perfect operations collapse. March 17th, 1943. The day truth broke through the noise. The day German intelligence knew, deep in their souls, that the war was already lost. Not because of any battle, but because their enemies had learned to fight the same shadow war they'd been waging, and had learned to fight it better. The game was over. The real war was just beginning.